Hi everybody. I'm Steven Siciliano. I'm the GPM for Microsoft Flow. So I'll be spending the next hour or so talking to you guys about Flow. If you're not here to talk about Flow, this isn't the session for you. We had a room change because so many people wanted to learn about Flow that we had to switch rooms. So hopefully you're in the right room now. If not, you can leave. You won't hurt my feelings. Microsoft Flow. Today we find out that a lot of business automation challenges already have a solution. And the solution isn't necessarily a great one because what ends up happening whenever you have business automation needs inside of your company is you have to do it yourself. You have to do it manually. You have to create solutions custom built to every different problem that you encounter. And this isn't a very scalable solution because you can only scale so much. And even if you're in a big company, you can only develop so many custom-built solutions to meet your needs. So I'm going to pause here. I do see there are a few seats up here if you're just coming in. So a little bit right here. So hopefully you can make room. Right. So today, in order to build solutions that accomplish automation solutions, you have to write a bunch of custom code usually. You have to write in languages that you may not have a lot of experience with. And even if you can do it, that doesn't mean that it's particularly easy. So what Microsoft Flow allows you to do is to work smarter by automating across all of the services that you connect to. There are a few canonical scenarios that we often talk about for Microsoft Flow. The simplest one is getting notifications. So whenever something important happens inside of your business, you want to be able to receive, in a very timely fashion, a notification that came in. So if you have an important email that you need to deal with, if somebody just closed a big case, you want to be able to notify yourself or your customers about that. You can use that with Microsoft Flow. Next, you can synchronize data with Microsoft Flow. So if you have multiple systems that all work together and you need to be able to flow the information across those systems, you can do that. How many of people in the room have used BizTalk in the past? So a decent amount. So if you are familiar with BizTalk, Microsoft Flow is like the super modern, slick, new version of BizTalk for business users that runs in the cloud. So it's a kind of a simple way to think about it. BizTalk is great for on-premises systems. If you have the ability to pay for a bunch of people to maintain your BizTalk installation. But with Microsoft Flow, you can actually synchronize data between your on-premises systems, your cloud systems, much more easily. You can also use Microsoft Flow to collect information. So one of the most popular ones I've seen on Twitter is you can actually set up a flow that listens to tweets about your company and saves it to an Excel spreadsheet or a SQL database that you can then build a Power BI dashboard on to visualize what's going on. So you can very easily visualize information using Power BI, and Flow can be the conduit that you can use to collect that information. And the final scenario that we often talk about is approvals. So with approvals, you want to be able to inject some sort of human into the process. That doesn't mean that you want a purely manual, human-based process. You don't want people to be checking off pieces of paper, but you still want people to be able to be involved and to check and make sure that something is going on. So that's how approvals are helpful. So when you come to flow.microsoft.com, we have hundreds of different templates that help you to get started. So Microsoft Flow gives you the ability to just, with a couple clicks, and I'll show you in the demo section about how this works, but in just a couple clicks to be able to set up connections between these different services. Now, building a flow from scratch is also very easy. We really are targeting power users, business specialists, business analysts with Microsoft Flow in a way that anybody can get started. And even if today you already are a technical user, if you're running a business that you have a bunch of developers today, that doesn't mean that you can't use this, because this can make you more efficient at your job. This can make it much more quickly and easily done when you build your solutions out. So this is an example here of a flow that has a Dropbox trigger, and it just sends an email. So it's a simple notification flow. And you can see we have a trigger at the top, underneath that the action. And the actions can actually take any of the data from the triggers and use them to go and call into a backing system. So it's very simple and straightforward, and I'll prove it to you by demoing it in a little bit. But this is just a little taste of what it looks like. Of course, beyond that simple scenario, you can build arbitrary, complex logic. So if you want to be able to run branches, the most common scenario with an approval, for example, is I want to do something if the item is approved and do something else if the item is rejected. You can do that with Flow because unlike something like IFTTT, where you have to trigger and do a single action, and that's all you can ever do, you can actually have logic built into your flow to run that type of information. So it's a very powerful capability, and I'll show that off as well. Now, of course, we have a bunch of out-of-box APIs that we connect to. Today, there's 37, I think. So not a huge number, but we're adding more and more every week. But what's really great is you can build your own APIs. So if you want to connect to a line of business system that you have, if you have an existing service that you are selling to customers, you can actually expose them as APIs to Microsoft Flow. And everything that we do inside of Flow is actually metadata-driven in a way that you can actually build the same experience for your customers that we have for our customers. So where does Flow fit into the bigger picture? Flow is part of the business application platform, which includes Flow, Power Apps, and Power BI. How many of you have heard of Power Apps? Awesome. So a lot of people are already hearing about Power Apps, so that's really good. And I assume most of you have also heard of Power BI. That's already a GA service. It's been around for a while. But what's great about these three products is they're all usable by the power user inside of your organization. So if you have somebody who doesn't necessarily want to write code or can't write code, they can actually build solutions using these three pieces. So on the Power BI side, you can use it to measure information and to visualize that information to your customers. Power Apps allow you to collect data from people. So if you want to be able to have a form where people enter the expense report information, or you want to be able to show people data mashed up from different services and then let them edit that information, you can do that by building a Power App without writing a single line of code. So it's extremely powerful. And then with Microsoft Flow, you can actually do the automation on top of that. Power BI, Power Apps, and Microsoft Flow are all built on top of all of the Azure services that you've come to know and hopefully love. On the Power BI side, obviously SQL, data analytics. Power Apps uses app services, and if you want to go and you want to write a little bit of custom code, you can actually do that by using Azure Functions, which is a new service that was announced just a little while ago. And then Microsoft Flow actually runs on top of Azure Logic Apps. So if you've used Logic Apps before, Microsoft Flow, think of it as the power user version of Logic Apps, where you can get started without having an Azure subscription, but be able to get it as kind of a very easy way. So in addition to Logic Apps, we also have API management and BizTalk, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. So we're built on top of the Azure capabilities, but you can still use those Azure layers if you're a developer to really get the advanced power and capability out of the service. Now, the other advantage of this family of products is that we have a common connector and data gateway infrastructure. So with the common connectors, you can connect to the same information from your Power Apps and your Power BI dashboards and your flows. So those connectors that I was showing you earlier, that 37 connectors, the same across all different pieces. And that's also very good because if you build an API for your company and you want to be able to connect to that from Flow, you can actually also connect to it from Power Apps. All of that will work just out of box. The other nice part of that is the gateway. So the Power BI Data Gateway is for connecting to information that is in your on-premises network. And you can use that today from Flow to be able to connect to a SQL database that you have running inside your network. So if you have a hybrid infrastructure that you've set up, you can use that to be able to automate from the cloud on top of the information that you're running on premises. So, enough slides. Let's switch to a demo. So this is the Flow portal. So I've just gone to flow.microsoft.com, and you're welcome to try this yourself. I just signed in. And today, Microsoft Flow is available in preview for free, and you can try it out yourself. I strongly recommend that you do. So I'm going to show a couple different flows. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the gallery. And this gallery shows a bunch of different templates that we have. As you saw on the slide, over a couple hundred templates, actually. And you can just browse here, see if anything catches your eye. Now, in addition to this list of templates, you can, of course, filter all the categorized templates. You can sort by different things. One of the more interesting ways that we can do notifications, though, is via push notifications to a phone. So one of the things that often happens is if you get a lot of email, you're probably getting, your phone is buzzing a lot if you have it set up so that way whenever you get an email, your phone buzzes. Alternatively, a lot of people will turn that off because it's just way too noisy. If you get a bunch of email like me, it's really hard to actually leave that on because your phone is just going to be on all the time. So what you have with a flow, though, is you can set up a push notification whenever you get a high importance email. So I can just come in here and I can search, and here are a bunch of different templates for push notifications. And you can see here, get a push notification for an important email. So when I click on a template, it gives me a little details about what this template does, what the flow that's going to be set up will look like. You can click Use this template. And at this point, it's going to ask me for my credentials. Now, in this case, I'm already set up with Office 365, so it automatically added that. If this was a template that used Dropbox or Slack or Trello, then at this point in time, I would have to enter my username and password for those respective services. So out of box, we connect to all of the Microsoft services, of course, but if you are using a third-party service, this is your opportunity to include that account information. But in this case, we don't need to do that. So I can just click on Continue, and it's going to show me the Flow Designer. And the Flow Designer, as you saw in the deck as well, it's pretty straightforward. On new email, so this is the trigger. This is what's going to kick off the flow. It's going to send a push notification. And at that point, I'm actually all set. I could just click Create Flow, and I would be done. And then whenever I get an important email, it would send a notification to my phone. But for the interest of demo, I'm going to show you what happens inside each of these steps. So on the On New Email step, I can customize what folder I want to listen to. In addition, I can add other filters, like I can only listen to emails from a certain email address, or only listen to emails that are going to a certain alias. So if you have a group alias and you want to be able to take action based on the messages that are sent to a particular team, you can use that here. Likewise, for sending a push notification, I can customize the content. And what you're seeing here is these orange boxes. These represent the data that at runtime is going to match whatever the email had. So the push notification is going to say, important mail, subject, colon, and then the actual subject of the email. So that's how you get the data through push notification. So at this point, I can click Create Flow, and if it works as expected. So now the flow has been created. So I now have asked one of my colleagues sitting in the front row to send me an important email, and if everything goes as expected, you'll actually see here exactly how the flow works. So you can see it just picked up the fact that my screen went blank. This is definitely not how it is supposed to work. But if I can blame this on network, it's slow because of bad network. There we go. So what's happening now is it's loading in, and you can see the green check marks indicate that I got a new email. It's actually going to show me what was in this email. Oh, and reminder to give this awesome audience some flow swag. So that does remind me we have a bunch of totes here, some laptop stickers. So come up after the session and grab those if I forget to announce that again. But then you can see it sent a push notification, and actually on my phone, which you will not be able to see from there, but you can see, well, you can't, but there's a Flow push notification here. I don't know, in the front row, can you see it says Flow in that push notification? So it is indeed a real push notification to my phone. So you can see how easy it was to set that up. I didn't really have to configure anything. I just gave it my account information, and it just worked. So that's really the aspiration for the templates that we have, is you can come in and just get it working. Now, in addition to being able to use one of the hundreds of out-of-box templates, we can also build something from scratch. So I'm going to show you how that works in a slightly more advanced scenario. So one of the big value props of Flow is that in addition to being able to automate all these things, we'll actually be tightly integrated with other Microsoft products. So from SharePoint to Dynamics, we are going to actually add Flow entry points throughout the user interface. So this is a SharePoint list here for vacation requests. And you can see somebody is going on vacation to a lot of different places. But from this SharePoint list, I can add a flow. So you can see here, I click Add a Flow. And this is going to give me a list of Flow templates that are unique to SharePoint lists. So that way, if I want to automate something on top of this SharePoint list, I can actually just do that right here. So I can see, what do I want to do? Well, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to set up an approval for this SharePoint list. And I don't see that example here, so I can just click on when a new item is added, run a custom action. So that's going to pull up this template right here, and I'm just going to use my same credentials as I would. I can click Continue, and that's going to kick me over to the Flow Designer. So this is going to have that first step, which is when a new item is created. And of course, it's already brought in my context of which SharePoint list, what details I want. So now I can actually construct my flow. So this big New Step button is what I can click. And I can click Add an Action. And whenever you add an action, you're going to be presented with a list of hundreds or maybe now even thousands of different activities that you can perform. These are all the activities that those connectors have. And you can see here we have a wide variety of connectivity. This is actually a preview build, so not all of these connectors exist quite today, but they will in the coming weeks. But for this approval, I'm just going to send a simple email approval, because I just want the manager to be sure to go and approve the email, or approve the vacation request, sorry. So if I go here, I type mail, and now we can see all of the different mail things that we support. And I can see send approval email right here. And I'm just going to send it to myself, because I'm the manager. Now, you may have noticed when I clicked in this field, I got all of these tokens. So these tokens represent all of the data from that SharePoint list. So what I can do is I can actually customize the email that gets sent and add a little bit of information about the vacation request. So, for example, you can see here we have comments, whether or not it's actually been approved, which of course it hasn't been yet. But I can just add the comments in here. And now it'll say the approval, it'll say approval request as well as the comments from the SharePoint list. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a condition. So this is that branching logic that I was talking about. With a condition, what you can do is you can check that the value of some property is equal to or not equal to or greater than, kind of whatever logic you want, to some other value. So in this case, I want to check that the selected option is approved. And I only want to actually mark the item in the SharePoint list as approved, vacation approved, if and only if I actually approve it. So then I'm going to add my logic to the if yes branch. And you can see here, I can now add additional steps. So I can type in SharePoint. I want to update that list item. So you can see here all the different SharePoint activities that we have. I can update item. And now all I need to do is paste in the SharePoint site URL, which I'll grab from here. And select which list I am updating. In this case, it happens to be the same list as before, but you can imagine that it could actually be a different SharePoint list if you would like. And now you see what is loaded up is it's loaded up all of the different fields that are in the SharePoint list. The start time, the end date, and if it's approved. And for vacation approved, I'm just going to say yes. So this will update that SharePoint list with the fact that I've approved it. But so far, I haven't done anything super interesting. What's really powerful about Microsoft Flow is it gives you the ability to reach out and connect to other systems now. So in addition to updating this item, what I can do is I can add a calendar to a calendar event, saying that that person is going to be out on vacation during that period of time. So I don't really want to use Google Calendar, so I'll use Office 365. I can create an event. And when I create an event, I have to pick which calendar I'm creating the event on. So I'll just create this on my own calendar for now. And then I choose the start time. And as before, I can now use these fields, except this time, instead of using the comments field, I'm actually going to use the vacation start date. And likewise, I can put the comments in, and then down here at the end time, I'm going to use the vacation end date. So you can see here, I'm able to populate many different fields for this calendar event with data from the SharePoint list. But I can take this a step further. Let's say I want to update the Team Yammer group whenever the person goes on vacation, hoping that they have a good vacation. So what I can do next is I can actually add a delay, and I can have the workflow wait until the actual vacation happens. So I can put in the, whoops, this is actually the wrong delay. I can delay until. There we go. My keyboard layout had switched. And I can put in the month and the day of month. And then I can add one more action and post to Yammer, have a good vacation. And when I post to Yammer, as before, I can, of course, use any of the data from the previous steps. So this is, in just a few minutes, I was able to construct this workflow that talks to a few different systems. It has some conditional logic. It's a long-running process because it actually delays until the vacation goes and happens. And if I wanted, I could even add something to this side of the branch. Let's say I wanted to send the person an email whenever I rejected their vacation request, explaining them why I rejected the request. So I could do that over in this no branch over here. So very simple, very powerful, very easy way to get started. So I'm going to switch back to the slides for a little bit. So where are flows available? So this is something that we just announced this week, the packaging for Flow and Power Apps as well. So Microsoft Flow and Power Apps will be available in both Office 365 as well as the Dynamics 365 applications and the Dynamics 365 plans. We just announced Dynamics 365, so you may not be particularly familiar with the way this works. But with Dynamics 365, you can purchase standalone applications. So I can purchase just the sales Dynamics 365 offering or the customer service or the operations. You can purchase those individual applications. And whenever you do purchase one of those Dynamics 365 applications, that will actually come with Microsoft Flow and Power Apps built in. So we will be available in every single Dynamics 365 application. Same thing with Office 365. Whenever you purchase Office 365, that respective Office 365 app that you get will be available with Flow. Finally, the Dynamics 365 plans are basically groups of different applications that work together. And those will also include Microsoft Flow. And what's a little different is whenever you purchase it with Dynamics 365 or Office, you get the Flow capabilities for just those applications. When you get the plan, you get the full standalone capabilities, the ability to connect to any different service. This is announced just recently, and it'll be a great way to get easy access to Flow because it'll be available in all of the different applications. So basically, the additional thing, which I don't think is captured very well on the slide, is Flow will have different kind of levels. So there'll be a free capability that's available to everybody. there will be some things that are available in different Office 365 plans, which we have not yet specifically said, like feature A, B, and C are going to be in E3, and D and F are going to be in E5. But if you're already familiar with things like Power BI and other things which are spread across the different Office 365 SKUs, that same pattern will be followed. So if something, if you think of E5 is all about, or not all about, but it's about analytics, so the analytics types features will be available in E5 and so forth. So I don't have an official slide to share exactly what will fall into each SKU, but that's the same pattern that you've seen for other services that we'll be able to include as well. There's a question back there. Yeah, so the question was, when I went through and I built the flow, you notice that I logged in with my credentials. So the question is, what user context does it run in? And the answer is, this flow that I just constructed will run in the context of me. And the reason that we do that is because flow can never elevate privileges. So there's no way for me to say, I build a flow and then I run it as my manager, and then I can see something that my manager doesn't want me to be able to see. Which I'll get to something in a moment, but basically what you can do, if you want to be able to run flow in the context of different users, you can build a template, and you can actually give that template to whichever users you want that flow to run as, and then they can provide their credentials, and then it will run in their context. So that way it gives you the capability to basically consent as a user, do I want this flow to run on my behalf? So that way we can't just do something without the permission of the respective end user. Now, one other thing is for logic apps, which is kind of the developer and IT capability, you will also have the ability to run as system accounts, which will allow you to kind of run in the background without user context and perform action on top of the data. But you have to specifically create those system accounts and grant permissions to them. It depends on what the flow does. So the question was, does that mean I have to copy the flow for every user that I want it to run? In this particular case, this flow listens to the SharePoint list. So whenever any user updates the SharePoint list, this flow will run. So it's not like every person has to have their own flow in order to get the approval email to be sent. But if I want a bunch of different users to use their own credentials, then there does have to be a separate kind of consent process for each one of those users. So let's go back to the slides. So as I showed just moments ago, this is included inside of SharePoint. And what's really powerful about the SharePoint scenarios is you can leverage data in context inside of SharePoint. So when I'm looking at a SharePoint list, I can just go and instantiate that flow, and I can pull in the data into the SharePoint list. And it's really a two-way street. In addition to being able to take action whenever something happens in a SharePoint list, I can get more information and put it into the SharePoint list as well. So if I want to, whenever an item is updated in Dynamics CRM, I want to pull in and get that information into the SharePoint list, you can actually do that as well. So it's a really powerful capability. Now, the thing that I just demoed, that new pane in SharePoint, that will be available for first released users. That's how SharePoint kind of does their rollout. So it's opt-in. Basically, if you opt in for your user or your tenant, you'll be able to try that soon. And then we will GA that integration. So basically, everybody who has SharePoint will be able to use it before the end of the calendar year. So that is definitely an exciting area. And I showed it in the context of SharePoint lists, but the same capability will be coming for document libraries. Question towards the back, yes.
Is it available for SharePoint Online plan too?
So this is actually, the question was, is it available for SharePoint Online? This is only available for SharePoint Online. So the button that I showed with the pane that allows you to directly connect to SharePoint lists, that is only in the SharePoint Online UI. Now that being said, we can connect to SharePoint on premises. If I go to the Flow website and I put in the site URL of your SharePoint on premises server farm, you can connect to it that way. So the capabilities are actually the same. It's just the in-context UI you only get in the online variation. Yes, question here?
Would there be any APIs for like a server error
Yes. So the flows themselves contain a full history of all the activity that's happened. So when I come here, you can see all of the logs of all the activity, and you see, in this case, I was testing this about an hour ago, and you see that that flow failed, and you can actually click on this, and you can see exactly what happened. So the logs of everything that happens in flow are kept, whether you're connecting to on-premises or the cloud.
I wanted to make a flow that checked the server status to see if, if an error of your on-premise server service fails. Could you set up a flow to handle that?
So the question was, can I set up a flow to check if a on-premise server has failed? So you can definitely set up a flow to ping a server and to check whether or not it's available. If the logs are being stored in a place that are accessible to flow, we could go and we could pull them and we could take some action based on the logs. So yes, it's pretty powerful. You can see here, I can open this up and I can see why this failed, and it just was a timeout, so the service just timed out. Now, flow is resilient to failures like this, so we actually, if a particular step fails, we have retry policies built in, so that way if something does go wrong intermittently, we'll retry, and we have a limit that is configurable as well on how many times we'll retry. So it's simple enough for people to figure out. Yes?
Do you need to save as data?
Yeah, so I can show you that as well. The question was, how do you save it as a template? So whenever you have a flow, if you save the flow, I'll just go directly to this page. You can just go to Publish. And the Publish page is basically you just click Submit to Gallery, and you give it a name and a description, and hit Submit. And then the public gallery that we have today is curated by us. So we'll make sure that if you used a bad word or your flow just doesn't work, that it isn't publicly available. By the end of this year, we will also have an organization-specific gallery. So if you want to create flows and share them inside of your company, like the example we were talking about with SharePoint, where I want to do something on behalf of each user, you can do that inside of a company using the same process, but instead of sending it to the public gallery, it'll go to the company gallery. Yes, question right there.
Just further on that topic, you mentioned within the company, but what if you wanted to use the same flow in different tenants?
So we haven't quite figured out exactly how to make that work yet. The question was, what happens if I want to take a flow and share it across different tenants? Now, you can create a flow and put it in the public gallery, but then everybody can see it. So we don't quite have a model where I can make it available to certain tenants, but not all tenants. But it's great feedback, and we'll definitely figure out how to do that in the future. Yeah.
What about the standards?
The question was, what's the future of SharePoint workflow? So that's a very common question that we get. SharePoint workflow is a great technology for building workflows inside of the context of SharePoint. So if you want to be able to continue automating your SharePoint lists and do approvals just inside of SharePoint, you will be able to do that. That's not going away. We're not deprecating SharePoint workflow. Flow is not the replacement for SharePoint workflow. That being said, if you do want to connect to any other service other than SharePoint, then Flow is ultimately going to be the answer. So what Flow is really so great is it allows you to reach across many different services, across many different Microsoft services, and bring them together inside of a common workflow infrastructure. So that's really what's powerful about SharePoint workflow. You're going to see the same answer if you ask about Dynamics CRM workflow. Dynamics CRM workflow isn't going to go away. That's going to continue to exist for Dynamics CRM scenarios. But if you want to be able to span across many different services, that's when Flow comes in. And question to the back. Yes? Yes, you absolutely can. So the question was, on a second step, can I go get more information? Yes, so you can enrich. Just like you were able to say, whenever I have a new item, go do something, you can also do something like, whenever I have a new item from SharePoint, go and query my dynamic CRM instance for all of the cases that are related to this SharePoint item, and then filter that list down, and then send an email for each of the open cases for that SharePoint list. So basically, you can have any step go. So in this case, if I can show you real quick, inside our actions, I can do list. You can see we can list a whole bunch of different things. So this is, I can go get rows, I can get entities, dynamics, AX, anything like that. So you can enrich with additional information. Question right there.
Is there an administrator view for all the flows that are created within the organization?
Yeah, great question. So the question is there an administrator view to see flows across an entire organization? Short answer is not today, but we will definitely have it by GA. So today, everything that runs is in the context of just a single user account. So I can see my flows, you can see your flows. The twain shall never meet. But having a single pane of glass that I can come to as an organization administrator and be able to see what flows do people create, what types of activities are they doing, what's failing, what's going wrong, being able to fix all of that is absolutely something that we're going to add in the next couple of months. Yeah, it's right there.
How do you reuse the flows, either between lists or libraries within a single Office 365 tenant?
Yep.
As a system integrator, how do you take the flow and reuse it in customers?
Yep, great question. So the question was, how do you reuse flows across lists, across tenants? And the answer for that is templates. So as I was able to construct this at the end, I can create a template from this flow. The template, what that keeps is the shape of the flow, the steps and the logic between them, but it does remove out the connection to a particular SharePoint list. So you can bring that, attach it to a different SharePoint list, a third SharePoint list, a fourth, and so forth. And that way the logic is consistent across them, but you can reuse that same capability. Question right there.
Can you show something with Dynamics?
If I get time, yes. And if I don't, then you can try it out for yourself as well. This is all publicly available, so we can do that as well. Yeah.
Can you create a flow at this point to read new or used, new or changed Active Directory user objects and create a contact record in CRM?
Sounds like a great scenario. I want to make sure my colleagues here are taking notes and capturing these scenarios. Yes? Cool. So we don't have a connector to AD Graph specifically that you can use to query users. We have a connector to, you can list users in Office 365, but unfortunately you can't use that as a trigger to like say, hey, every time a new user is added to my directory, go and do something. So that's just something that we can add to the infrastructure over time. And if you'd like, you can build your own API through our extensibility model that does that. So you can connect to really any custom API if we haven't added it ourselves yet. Great. So Dynamics 365, there's, whoops. Just a question about this. I'd recommend checking out the Dynamics 365 blog post announcement that Jujar and James did about a week ago. So definitely read about that. And the idea is that Microsoft Flow, along with Power BI and Power Apps, is really the extensibility solution for building composite business applications on top of 365, whether that's Dynamics 365 or Office 365. So I've actually talked about, everybody is very prescient. They've asked about these types of things already, so maybe we can go quickly through this. But the idea of templates is super important because that gives an extensibility point where you can build out reusable components, and you can use that across users or across, ultimately across tenants, as people were asking about. So today, completely public, by GA, we will have the ability to lock it down to a specific tenant, or potentially even within a single tenant if you have different departments, you can share it with only specific people, such as you desire. So next, this extensibility that I was talking about. So if you have your own services, your own APIs that you would like to be able to connect to, you can do that using what we call the custom API feature. But all that is if you come and you bring in what the endpoint of your API is, how to authenticate against that API, and the input and outputs for the operations in the API, then you can actually get the same experience that we have for all the built-in actions inside of Flow, but with your own services. So it's great when you have information inside your company that you want to be able to use. You can actually pull that in. or if there's an API that we haven't exposed in our built-in connectors that you want to use, you can actually do the same method to leverage that. So to build one of these connectors, the requirements aren't particularly onerous. It has to be an HTTP Web API. Actually, it isn't on the slide, but it has to speak JSON. So if it's a XML or SOAP-based API, we don't support that natively today. We will be adding ways to support that in the future, though. It has to use one of the standard forms of authentication, so API key, basic auth, OAuth 2.0, basically what you'd expect. And then the APIs have to have human consumable contracts. And to get triggers, so the events that happen at the beginning of the flow, we actually have two methods for that. One is we can do webhooks, which are basically an event that happens in your system calls into flow via kind of a push method. And that's highly scalable, strongly recommended, because the other alternative is polling, where we ping your system every minute and ask, is there new data, is there new data, is there new data? Problem with that, it's not super scalable, because if a bunch of people set up flows, obviously you'll be getting a lot of requests. So we support it. The reason we support it is because it's very easy to get set up at the beginning, but as you get to larger scale, you probably want to switch to webhooks. So another thing which was announced in the announcement last week is AppSource. So AppSource today doesn't contain flows, but it will by the GA of Microsoft Flow. And that will be great, because then you will be able to build solutions that contain Power Apps, Power BI dashboards, and flows in a single package. Which means if you today want to sell your solutions inside AppSource, you will be able to include all of those assets. And with just a few clicks, people across all the different companies that can use AppSource will be able to take advantage of that. So AppSource is really the direction that we're going in terms of being able to distribute solutions. So I strongly recommend checking it out today. And over time, we'll be adding in those additional capabilities that we talked about. So it's really an awesome way to be able to repeat IP across different customers. So I alluded to this earlier, but Flow is powered by Logic Apps. So Logic Apps is an Azure service that developers, IT pros can take advantage of. So if you're trying to look for a solution for power users, for business users inside of your company, or you just want something very quick, easy to set up, then Flow is the answer. But if you want to use a developer solution, if you want to use Visual Studio, for example, then Logic Apps is going to be the answer. So it pivots a bit based on persona. Ultimately, every time that a flow is created, a Logic App is created, but we'll manage all of those Logic Apps on behalf of the user. The Logic Apps, if you use Logic Apps directly, then you'll be able to manage that yourself, and you can do whatever it is you would like inside the Azure subscription. So it's even the same visual designer and editor, and Logic Apps will always be able to do everything that Flow can do. So just another way to visualize this is Flow focuses primarily on these business users. So there's a lot of them, but not a lot of sophistication. And Logic Apps is down there kind of at the end of the curve, where you're more sophisticated and there's fewer, and BizTalk is probably around here, even more sophisticated, but lower volume. So just to kind of recap some of those points that we've been talking about, we have really a way to enable your employees to build out solutions more easily. So if you inside your company have people who are building automated relation solutions today, it's much easier with Microsoft Flow, which means you can build out more stuff. So if you decrease the cost and effort to build something, you can build more. So you can build more solutions, more integrations with Microsoft Flow. You can integrate them with Dynamics, with Flow directly, and Logic Apps are a great opportunity to move up and to build more powerful solutions. So this is our product roadmap. We are kind of on the left side, so we're in Q3 right now, 2016. So some of the things that we recently announced is the Android mobile app. That just went live today. On-premises data gateway, that was last week. And then in context for SharePoint Online, as I mentioned, that is available for first release users very soon, and then it will be generally available, actually, I guess we're saying by the end of Q3. So that's that. And then in Q4, we have general availability. So by the end of the year, we will be generally available. We'll be available in 42 languages. So all of the Office languages, with the exception of the right-to-left languages. We have app source integration coming, so that way we'll be able to build those solutions, see them across different scenarios. Will be integrated into the Dynamics 365. And another cool thing that's coming is we will be able to leverage device signals. So today we have a mobile application that allows you to receive push notifications. You can also use it to browse the activity of your flow. But one of the features we're working on is if I want to be able to take action based on what location I'm at. If I want to, say, get the customer's details when I arrive at the customer site, you will be able to set that up using geofencing right from our Flow mobile app. So a lot of exciting things are coming. Some things that aren't here, but I've talked about, that organizational gallery that will be there before GA, the ability to share those templates inside of that organization. And then at the top, those are the Power Apps roadmap. It's very similar. Power Apps and Flow are pretty much on the same timeline. We're sister teams working hand in hand. As I mentioned, Power BI is already generally available today. So now I have about 12 minutes or so for questions. It sounds like people have already been asking questions, which is great. But let's get started.
I have a question. You said it relies on the Azure services.
Yes.
So what's the cost model? Is there any licensing?
Yes. So the question was, what is the cost model? Because we rely on Azure services. So what I can tell you is Azure Logic Apps, which is what we run on top of, is basically a consumption-based cost model. So with those Azure services, you're going to pay X amount of microcents per transaction. Basically, that's how Azure generally works. We will not use that model for Flow, though, because Flow will be included with Office 365. There will be a per-user cost. So basically, each user will get some very generous included quantities of activities. And then you can add more user licenses if you would like more. So that's the billing model we will have. Back there again. The question was, is Power Apps meant to replace InfoPath? The types of scenarios that you can do with InfoPath today, and you've historically been able to, you should be able to do with Power Apps by the end of the year. I don't think we're saying specifically that it's a full replacement. I don't think there's the ability to migrate InfoPath forms to a Power App, for example. But in terms of scenarios, it is basically the exact same scenario area, with the exception of InfoPath also had the ability to do XML files that you can kind of package up the form with and send them and email them. I don't think there's any plans for that inside of Power Apps. That's right there.
Talking about InfoPath as a similar topic, is it supposed to replace some of the third-party tools that haven't been added in the past instead of InfoPath?
We don't have any specific third-party tools in mind that we're trying to go out and get rid of and replace. One of the things that's super valuable about Microsoft is we have tons of great partners. So obviously this is WPC, so hopefully you're all excited to partner with us. If not, maybe we shouldn't be here. So there are a number of tools out there which help you to do those types of scenarios. So we really are looking forward to partnering with those partners and developing solutions that enable silos to be built on top of our platform. So ultimately, what we have today as a platform, we're not going to be able to reach into every scenario that every customer has. It simply isn't possible. So there's really a lot of opportunities, we think, for people to partner on top of it. And I've covered a bunch of scenarios here today, but even in the Power App scenarios, absolutely, we want third-party solutions to be valuable. We don't want to go out and kill successful third parties. That'd be very terrible. In the back? The question is there a limitation on the number of workflow instances that can run? The short answer is no. So because ultimately we will run in the user's context, and the user themselves will have a limit on the number that they can have according to kind of the pricing model, that SKU. But kind of across all of your users, collectively, you can get to extraordinarily high volumes of workflows. And there really isn't an architectural limitation on how many workflows can be running. You can have 1,000 instances that are running or 10 instances. It's just kind of up to your user scenarios.
Will this reach down to like lower Office SKUs like Essential or Premium?
So Microsoft Flow will always have some capabilities that are available for free. So yes, there will definitely be something that is available in the lower Office SKUs. Like I said earlier, I can't really speak to exactly what is going to land in each SKU yet. We're still working through those details. But yes, there will always be something that you can do for free out of box, as well as the additional premium features built on top.
So would Office be a basic requirement to be able to leverage Flow at all?
The question was, is Office a requirement to leverage Flow? And the answer is no. If you don't want to connect to Office services, you don't need to use Office. So you may have noticed when I was going through the actions, if you use Google Apps, for example, for your calendaring and your email, you can actually build flows on top of Google Apps. If you use Salesforce instead of CRM, we connect to Salesforce. So
The reason I'm asking is because you bundled this with Office 365.
yes.
But if I'm a Salesforce and Google Analytics or let's say Google
Yep.
Mail, right? So how does the Office 365 come into play? I still want to be able to do Flow.
Yes.
For workforce automation.
Yep.
But then if it's tied back to Office 365, how does that connect?
It's a non-exclusive bundle. So anybody will be able to purchase a standalone variant of Microsoft Flow. So if you just want to use it to automate systems completely unrelated to anything that I've shown on screen, you'll be able to do that just fine. And you'll get the same, all of the limits and stuff that we talk about will be in free that won't be there. So you don't have to purchase Office 365 in order to get anything. You'll be able to come to us directly and use it to build whatever solution you'd want. Obviously, as Microsoft, we prefer you to use Office 365, but absolutely not a requirement. Yes, right over there.
Integration with Microsoft Planner and when?
The question is Microsoft Planner and when? The answer is soon. We have, I haven't mentioned this yet, but we actually have a forum that you can go to and submit ideas. And we need feedback. We need questions exactly like this to know what to build. And conveniently, it does look like it is the top request right now. So that indicates to us that we should go build that very soon. Or maybe it's already being built.
The question is how fast it is actually when an event happens, how fast the flow is triggered.
Yep. So the question is, how fast is it when the event happens? It depends on whether or not the event is being polled or if it's the push model. So if we're polling, then we run about every minute or so. So we'll go and we'll ask, and which means that there is an up to 59.99 second delay, potentially, in the worst case, between when the event happens and when we're aware of it. If you're using the push model, then it is instantaneous. And specifically what that means is between the different steps, we introduce latency on the order of tens to hundreds of milliseconds. So if you have a process that needs to execute reliably under a second from when the thing is pushed to when several steps have happened, you will be able to do that. If you need it under 50 milliseconds reliably, we probably can't meet your requirements today. But we are obviously working all the time on getting that delay down as much as possible. Yeah.
So generally faster than the 5-minute window in SharePoint.
Yes, we will generally be faster than the 5-minute window inside of SharePoint or other competing workflow services. Yes, question in the back.
Regarding the vacation calendar example, was it so that you can just reply to the notification that you received for the approval?
So the question was, this is a great scenario. The question was, in the vacation scenario, could you just reply to the notification that you get? And we would love to be able to do that. We can't do it quite today. But yes, scenarios like that are exactly what we want to build. And particularly in approval processes, there's a lot of value in being able to do stuff like that. And we're thinking of the same thing, like if I get a notification to my phone, I should be able to just tap on that notification, hit approve, and then I'm just there. So we're definitely thinking of ways to improve that process and make it smoother. Yes, right there.
Any plans for Power BI integration?
Yes, plans for Power BI integration. So as I mentioned, you can already do things like collect data and save it to a SQL or Excel for Power BI. Another thing that we're working on right now is actually the ability to take a Power BI report and get that into a flow, so you can then post it to Yammer or send an email every week about the latest status of the Power BI dashboard. So that's another piece of integration we're doing. And then ultimately, kind of where we want to go is I can go to a Power BI dashboard and say, hey, if this crosses a certain threshold, if the number of customer complaints goes above 1,000, go off and run some logic. We will be adding support for that in the nearest term as well. So yeah, Power BI is great. Question in the back?
Is there a mechanism to maintain these flows? Let's say I publish a flow and then my API changes, I want to update that flow, like people want to see?
So the question is there a way to maintain it? So if you publish a flow and then you want to update your API, it's not quite as easy as maybe it should be, because once the user has taken a template and used it, they have the ability to kind of customize that. So if you change it so that way, first of all, the hope would be there are never API changes that are breaking. So if you update the API, hopefully your API is versioned in such a way that existing users will continue to work. But what you can do is all of the new people who use that template will get the latest version. So that's kind of what we hope. Other questions? Yes, back there. The question is all flow data stored in the Office graph. So the flow APIs, so like the list of flows that you see, that information is retrievable via REST APIs that we have. We're actually not integrated into Graph quite yet. It's something we're working on in the near term. The data that kind of sits between flows, like as if I get an item in a SharePoint list and I go and I do some other stuff, there's actually data in between, so that way we can remember the state. That is all kind of expunged after 30 days. So kind of the history isn't persisted for very long, so we don't have any immediate plans to make that available through Graph. But if it's something that we need, we can always add it. Yes.
Would it be possible to take a flow and then use it using Visual Studio and upgrade it to a logic flow?
Yes, so the question is, will it be possible to take a flow and if I want to use it in Visual Studio, upgrade it to a logic app? That is actually something that we want to build, yes. We can't do it today. You can't do it easily today. Technically, you can look at Fiddler, take the definition, and save it as a logic app, and it'll work. But we don't have a UI that actually makes that process nice, and we definitely want to do that before the end of the year. So that's a great question. I think we have time for one more, or we can call it. So as a reminder, there's swag right here. There are also a couple other sessions I want to refer to. We have a theater session where we'll do a bunch more demos. This is more talking and Q&A, which is fine. But if you want to see some demos, Wednesday at 1:30 in the C&E Theater, you can check that out. A couple Power Apps sessions as well. Another workshop on building Power Apps on Tuesday, as well as a theater session on Tuesday as well, right afterwards. Myself and my two colleagues down here, Marwan and Sine, will stick around after if you have questions one-on-one. Feel free to talk with us. We also have a booth in the main expo area, so you can come by whenever you'd like. Happy to answer questions. Love to hear how you guys would be interested in using Flow, what feedback you have. And thank you very much. Yes.